So let's talk about hand quilting, my favorite. I get a question a lot is, what size stitches do I need to have for quilting, hand quilting? Many people think that you have to have very small stitches in order to be considered a good quilter. That is not my theory. I do not believe that at all. And I never have. I started quilting years ago when I was a teenager, and I didn't have the patience for little tiny stitches, and frankly, I didn't enjoy it if I did tiny stitches. So I like to go with a little bit bigger stitch, and that I just call my stitch. And it works very well. So I'm going to show you a little bit of hand quilting. This is a quilt that I have done. And in fact, I finished the whole quilt, binding and everything, and I had hand quilted it, bound it, and then I realized there's one section I haven't quilted yet, so I'm going to show you how I do the hand quilting on this. But let's sort of talk about what's already here, the stitches. So what I've done with this quilt, because this is a very busy quilt, I decided it was okay to use my bigger stitches, and I decided to instead of doing a contrasting thread with hand quilting, I do like to blend them in. So I put red on red, and I put white on all of the other places that are not a solid red. So let me show you what that looks like up close. And it's another reason why you don't have to have perfect stitches. These are not small, you see, so that's the red on red. And let me flip it over. Here's the back, and you can see those stitches. I also, you can see, I do not mark perfectly straight. I like to quilt without marking or with very little marking. So you see those, they're not perfectly straight, but can you tell when you're looking at the quilt? Now, if I thought this was going in a show and people were going to be looking very closely at the threads, then maybe I would do differently, but I don't put mine in shows. My family doesn't look really close and doesn't care anyway. They love the quilt. So let's show you. This is the section here, and I'll get it a little bit closer. This is the section here where I need to stitch. So I like to use just a cotton thread, regular cotton thread. And you can use polyester, it's slippery for hand quilting. That's why I like to use cotton. I like to make things easy for myself. And I'm gonna thread my needle. Needle, I use, you probably can't see it, I use whatever needle comes to hand that I like. You can use the very small betweens. They're short and they're a very small hole. And those are great for getting the really tiny stitches. I'm not really worried about that here, so I like a bigger needle just so I can thread it easier. And I still can do that. All right, so in my, I do not put knots when I do my quilting, because one time, early days, I had knots, I used them and I buried them, which means I put a knot in and I just tugged it so that it would bury in between the layers, but they all came popped to the top when I washed that quilt. So it was, I don't use knots, and I've never had problems with threads coming out, and I have quilts that are 40 years old. Ooh, I don't like to say that. Okay, so I don't use marking, I just eye this, and I'm gonna start, see how well you can see this. I'm gonna start, here's my wedge that has not yet been quilted, and I'm gonna quilt lines that are about a 1/4 inch, a little bit more than that, up to this edge, because you'll see there, I have quilted down. So let me show you a little bit more how my theory on how I did this quilt. When I approached this quilt and said, where am I going to put the lines and where am I going to quilt it? So let me show you the quilt. I decided that I was going to take each of these squares that starts with this middle, and I was going to start my quilting there. Okay, so everywhere I had this in the center, and the blocks are about, they're like an 18-inch block. When I went to decide how I'm going to quilt this block, I'm going to put a piece of preview paper over it. It's just a cellophane that's called preview paper, and it's used exactly for this reason. You can use it to decide where your marks are going to go before you quilt it. I'm going to use it to show you where I already put my markings so you can see. So I would start with red thread. Remember, red is going to go in every solid block that's red solid. And I started at the bottom, and I quilted here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So as I said, I started here, and I quilted 1, 2. Well, let me show you. I'd stitch to stitch. I'd travel my needle. I'd stitch, stitch, stitch. Travel my needle. Stitch. Travel my needle. And stitch. Now, what does travel your needle mean? I'm going to show that to you in a couple minutes. It is simply placing your needle in between the layers so that you can move your needle from one section to another. And you can usually only travel about the length of your needle. So then I would switch to white, and I would start here, and I would stitch, stitch, stitch. Travel my needle, stitch, travel my needle, stitch, travel my needle, and stitch. So you can see, I hope you can see, that all of my stitches are lining up here. Here's where the lines line up on top. So then I would do the same thing. Red, stitch, 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 travel, stitch. White, stitch, 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 travel, stitch. Again, so now you can see that this is the design. Let's show you in white. This is the design that I'm building. And I will keep building that all the way out that block. And I will just keep doing the same thing. Red here, stitch, 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 white, stitch, 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 until we get right to the edge. And the next block, I then would move to the next section and start again. And that's how I quilted it. I gotta make sure I don't get marker on my quilt. And that's how I quilted this one. I didn't have to mark anything. You can, if you want, to use a ruler and mark ahead as you go. You can do that. I just like to get going. I don't like to mess around. Now, another thing that I always do is I always put something busy on the back, because you can see I like to put busy on the back because my stitches are bigger on the back, and this way nobody really cares. And it's kind of hidden anyway. It's not going to draw your eye when someone says, "Oh, what a beautiful quilt," and "Oh, I like your backing." They're not going to say, "Oh, your stitches are big," because they really can't see them from where you are. They'd have to get this close before they could see them. So now I'm going to show you. We are going to. So now back to where this is the section here that I haven't done yet, because I got up to this layer where I have the stitches here and the stitches here, red, white. Now you don't have to change your thread colors, I just like to. And this is, you know, when you're gonna do a quilt, you're not doing it because you're in a hurry. You're gonna just take your time. I like to watch movies and do my quilting on the couch, my favorite. I could do that every day. Okay, so I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna start right here. And I'm gonna show you what I do to anchor my threads, and it's not a big deal. I will start out, it's another reason why, at least to get started, use a bigger needle. Anyway, so I will start out a little bit from my stitching start point. The stitching start point is there. So I'm gonna start here, and I'm just gonna poke my needle in the middle. I'm gonna feel on the bottom to see, is it coming through? No. That means I've got it in between the batting and the backing. And I'm going to come up right there where I want to stitch. I will then just simply leave a tail here. Now what's going to happen is that as you keep quilting, you'll be running over that thread here and there, and they all get interlocked together. And then especially if you wash the quilt, everything just kind of soaks right in. I never have a trouble with stitches coming out. And like I said, I've washed some of my quilts over and over and over. Yes, I like to have a leather thimble. These are my favorite. They are from, I don't know how you say it, Bohin, B-O-H-I-N. I will use it either on this finger or on my thumb, but today I'm going to show you this, my middle finger. So, all right, so I'm going to angle this slightly towards me, and when I poke my needle in, I'm going to poke through. Now there's a lot of layers right there, so I'm just going to poke through and come up. My finger is underneath it, so I'm going to poke till I feel my finger, and then I'm going to push it up. So I push it up, I pull it through, and I don't go real tight, I just pull that just enough to anchor that first one, and I'm going to do one back. So one stitch that I start behind the thread, and I come up. Let's go a little some shorter than that. Okay, about the same. And now is where I'm going to load my needle, because now that I'm past the bulky part there, I'm going to go ahead and put my needle in, push it up, and I feel it with my thumb so that I can feel where it's coming up. Push it down, and my index finger pushes it back up, and then I feel it with my thumb. And that just stops it so I can make sure I'm getting that stitch. Down, I'm going to pull it back a little bit, down, and then up. Okay, so you see I've got 3 stitches on there. That way it goes faster. And so I just keep doing that. Down, push it up, feel it with this, push it up, feel it with that. And I can get 2 or 3 stitches every time I go through. I always keep it on top of the quilt. The needle never needs to go to the back of the quilt. Okay, so I'm at the edge. Now I need to travel because my next line, oops, I'm not at the edge. I got to go all the way over here. And I can tell that because here's where my other stitches start. Okay, my next line starts here. So I'm going to take my needle and just put it under the first layer, but in between. So I'm feeling with my finger to make sure underneath that it's not coming through, and it's not. And I'm going to come up right here where I want to start again. Sure you can see it. Okay, so now I'm going to go down. Gets me started. Now I do back and forth. This time I'm going to push with my thumb. When I first started, I always did my index finger, and I would just keep turning the hoop so that I could go back the other direction. So I would turn it like this so I can come back, and then I would turn it so I can come back. But I'll show you both because I do like to use both now, and it was only after years that I started to do this. So it's on my thumb now, and I'm going to be pushing the needle. So I'm going to put it down. I like to point it straight down when I first get started here. And now I'm pushing it up, down, push it up, feel it with my finger, down, push it up, feel it with my finger. And I pull through. Now you can see, I can see my stitches here, so I can see that I'm staying pretty straight, but I don't, it doesn't bother me if it goes off a little bit, because in the long run, when you have all the stitches in and you're looking at the quilt, you're not looking at every single line, almost never. Okay, and I'm just going to keep going down. And this is where people talk about the rocking motion, is you start down, push it up, down, push it up, down, push it up. And one more, and I'm there. And I'm ready to travel in between the layers up to the next layer. And I find this so very relaxing that I can do this for hours. Now, once in a while, you'll see a stitch that's bigger. I don't really care about that. If you like, you can pull it out and go back and make it smaller. I'm going to show you now how to end the thread. So I'm at the end of my thread. Leave yourself a good couple inches. All I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle in between the layers and I'm going to travel it out. So now it's coming out here. Pull it out, pull that thread all the way through, and then I will snip that thread off. And it's not harder than that. So, the other thing people ask me is how do I hold my quilt? So I'll show you that. I hold my quilt, I'm sitting on the couch, I get it all up around me. I can put it up here, or I can just push it in my elbow and my arm. I'll get the hoop in front of me. My other hand is underneath. My two hands are together right now. And I will start just like this. So as I'm quilting, it looks like this. Let me get my finger. I'm coming toward me, and I'm quilting. And you just keep doing that. You can then move the hoop so that it's the direction you want to go. So I'm always just kind of adjusting it and quilting. And you just get it fluffed up around you so you always have that nice hoop. I am just using a large wooden hoop. It's you can get these a lot of places. They're not expensive. And I like this size is perfect. This is a 14-inch and it's perfect for me in my lab. You can go bigger, you can go smaller, completely up to you. Thanks for joining me.
And be sure to subscribe to our channel. You can do so here by clicking the subscribe button. That way you'll find out about new videos as they become available.